It was Christmas on the island of Sodor. All the engines were working hard. Thomas and Toby were busy carrying people and parcels up and down the branch line. Everyone was happy. Only the coaches, Annie and Clarabelle, were complaining. It's always the same before Christmas, they groaned. We feel so full, we feel so full. Oh, come on, said Thomas. Where's your festive spirit? Christmas Day is almost here. By the side of the track was a lonely little cottage with a familiar figure waving to them. It's Mrs. Kindly, whistled Thomas. Peep, peep, Happy Christmas. Thomas always felt better for seeing her. Christmas just wouldn't be Christmas without Mrs. Kindly. When work was over, Thomas went to see the other engines. All their coats had been polished. Ha, said Gordon, just look at us. Your driver will have to work fast to get you as smart as us. Never mind that, replied Thomas. I've something important to say. Do you realize it's a whole year since Mrs. Kindly saved us from a nasty accident? You remember when she was ill in bed and... Yes, of course, interrupted Edward. You told us how she waved her red dressing gown out of her window to warn you about a landslide ahead. And you and Toby gave her presents, Percy joined in. And the Fat Controller sent her to Bournemouth to get better. But, said James and Henry together, the rest of us have never thanked her properly. Exactly, said Thomas. So now I think we should all give her a special Christmas party. Everyone was getting very excited, and the drivers felt sure that the Fat Controller would agree, as indeed he did. The engines were all busy making plans when silence fell. The Fat Controller had bad news. The weather's changed badly. Mrs. Kindly is snowed up. Toby says he'll help to rescue her. You must help too, Thomas. There's no party unless you do. Thomas hated snow, but he said bravely, I'll try, sir. We must rescue her. We must. There's a good engine. You and Toby will manage splendidly. Thomas charged the snowdrifts fiercely. Sometimes he swept them aside. Sometimes they stuck fast, and the men had to loosen them. But at the cutting near the cottage, they could go no further. Look at that, exclaimed Thomas's fireman. Peep, 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 here we are, whistled Thomas. An answering wave came from an upstairs window. Then they heard a familiar sound. That's Terence, said Thomas. He's come to help too. Sure enough, Terence had a snowplow and was working hard to clear a path to the railway line in safety. At long last, the rescue was complete. Percy took the tired workmen home. Terence said goodbye to Mrs. Kindly and promised to take care of her cottage as he watched them all set off. The engines made good time. No more snow had fallen, but the yard was dark. Thomas's heart sank. Suddenly, all the lights went on. What a marvelous sight awaited Mrs. Kindly. Well done, said the Fat Controller. I'm really proud of you all. Mrs. Kindly especially thanked the smaller engines. Thomas and Toby are all friends, she said. And now, Percy, you are my friend too. Percy was very pleased. 3 cheers for Mrs. Kindly, he called. Peep, peep, peep. They all whistled.
We wish you a Merry Christmas. We wish you a Merry Christmas. We wish you a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year.
Thomas the Tank Engine and his friends thought it was the best Christmas ever, and Mrs. Kindly could think of nowhere she would rather live than here with them on the island of Sodor. Donald and Douglas are twins. and had arrived from Scotland to help the Fat Controller, but only one engine had been expected. The twins meant well, but did cause confusion. The Fat Controller had given them numbers, Donald 9 and Douglas 10, but he was still planning to send one engine home. There was a brake van in the yard that had taken a dislike to Douglas. Things always went wrong when he had to take it out. His trains were late and he was blamed. Douglas began to worry. Donald, his twin, was angry. "You're a muckle nuisance," said Donald. "It's to leave you behind I'd be wanting." "You can't," said the van. "I'm essential." "Oh, Kaya!" Donald burst out. "You're nothing but a screeching and a noise when all's said and done. Spot Dougie, would you? Take that!" "Oh, oh, oh!" cried the van. "There's more coming, should you misbehave." The van behaved better after that. Until one day, Donald had an accident. The rails were slippery. He couldn't stop in time. The Fat Controller was most annoyed. "I am disappointed, Donald. I did not expect such, clumsiness from you. I had decided to send Douglas back and keep you." "I'm sorry, sir," said Donald. "I should think so too. You have upset my arrangements. Now James will have to help with the goods work, while you have your tender mended. James won't like that." The Fat Controller was right. James grumbled dreadfully. "Anyone would think," said Douglas, "that Donald had his accident on purpose. I heard tell about an engine and some tar wagons." "Shut up," said James. "It's not funny." He didn't like to be reminded of his own accident. "Well, well, well," said Douglas. "Surely, James, it wasn't a you. You didn't say." James didn't say. He slouched sulkily away. "He's cross," sniggered the spiteful brake van. "We'll try to make him crosser still." "Hold back," giggled the trucks to each other. James did his best, but he was exhausted when they reached Edward Station. Luckily, Douglas was there. "Help me up the hill, please," panted James. "These trucks are playing tricks." "We'll show them," said Douglas. Slowly but surely, the snorting engines forced the trucks up the hill. But James was losing steam. "I can't do it! I can't do it! Lay it to me!" shouted Douglas. The guard was anxious. "Go steady! The van's breaking!" The van was in pieces. No one had been hurt, and soon Edward came to clear the mess. The Fat Controller was on board. "I might have known it would be Douglas," he said. "Douglas was grand, sir," said Edward. "James had no steam left, but Douglas worked hard enough for 3. I heard him from my yard." "2 would have been enough," said the Fat Controller. "I want to be fair, Douglas, but I don't know. I really don't know." The Fat Controller was making up his mind about something, but that's another story.
It was a splendid morning on the island of Sodor. James was feeling very pleased with himself. His red paint gleamed in the sunshine as he sped along the line. He reached the junction just as Percy puffed in with some trucks. James was surprised to see him.
What are you doing here, Percy? You should be at the next station by now. You're late.
I know, sighed Percy. These trucks have been troublesome all morning.
That's no excuse, Percy, snorted James. Nothing should stop us. The Fat Controller relies on us to be on time. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'll be on my way. And James puffed importantly away.
Bossy buffers, muttered Percy. James arrived at the harbour. It was market day. The harbour yard was filled with the sweet smell of fruit from faraway lands.
The fruit was delivered in big ships. James watched as strawberries, oranges, melons and bananas were carefully loaded into his trucks.
Then he set off for the station on the main line. On the way, he met Thomas.
Really reliable. That's me, panted James proudly. Pity the same can't be said for Percy. Peep, peep. Goodbye.
What was that about? Gasped Annie and Clarabel. That was trouble. Trouble for James. Just wait and see. Percy was back in the yard and busy shunting. He had the trucks in good order and was making up for lost time. But the station master had bad news. What's happened? Asked Percy's driver. James's brakes have jammed. We need Percy's help right away. Percy quickly set off to the rescue. He found James stuck on the line and looking glum. Percy couldn't help laughing. Got yourself in a jam, eh, James? What you might call a sticky situation. Be quiet, said James. It's not funny having jam brakes. And not very reliable either, teased Percy. I am surprised you let it happen, James. Nothing should stop us engines. That's enough, Percy, said his driver. Can you push these trucks? Of course I can, whistled Percy. There's no time to lose. James has done too much of that already. James angrily hissed steam as Percy was coupled to the trucks. Off we go, said Percy. I'll have to go fast to get there in time. These big engines are so unreliable. Be careful, Percy, called his driver, but Percy was in a hurry. He didn't see that the points had failed and that he had been diverted into a siding. Look out, Percy, shouted his driver and applied the brakes. But it was too late. The driver and the fireman had jumped clear, but squashed fruit squirted all over Percy. The Fat Controller arrived. Percy, you are not to blame for the points failure, but I do not run a jam factory. Yes, sir. No, sir. And Percy squelched sadly away. You know, there's more than one way to get jammed. We all learned that today. What's more, we also learned that sometimes when engines help each other out of a jam, things can still go wrong. So, that means we learned a lot today, and therefore, we're really useful engines after all.
Daisy, the diesel rail car's work in the countryside was full of surprises. But she was frightened of bulls and cows, and she remained very lazy and stubborn. One day, Toby brought Henrietta to the station where Percy was grumpily shunting. "Hello, Percy. I see Daisy's left the milk behind again." "I'll have to make a special journey with it, I suppose." "Anyone would think I'd nothing to do," grumbled Percy. "Tell you what," replied Toby, "I'll take the milk, you fetch my freight cars." The drivers and station master agreed. Percy had never been to the quarry before. He began ordering the freight cars about. "Hurry along," he said. The freight cars grumbled to each other. "This is Toby's place. Percy's got no right to poke his funnel up here and push us around." They whispered and passed the word. "Pay Percy back. Pay Percy back." "Come along," puffed Percy. "No nonsense." "We'll give him nonsense," giggled the freight cars. But they followed so quietly that Percy thought they were under control. Suddenly, they saw a notice ahead. "All trains stop to pin down brakes." "Beep, beep!" "Brakes, conductor, please!" But before he could check them, the freight cars surged ahead. On, they cried. "Help, help," whistled Percy. The man on duty at the crossing rushed to warn traffic with his red flag, but was too late to switch Percy to the runaway siding. Frantically trying to grip the rails, Percy slid into the yard. "Beep, beep! Look out!" The brake van was in smithereens. Percy's driver and fireman had jumped clear, but Percy was stranded. Next day, Sir Topham Hatt arrived. Toby and Daisy had helped to clear the wreckage, but Percy remained on his perch of freight cars. "We must now try," said Sir Topham Hatt, "to run the branch line with Toby and a diesel. You have put us in an awkward predicament, Percy." "I am sorry, sir." "You must stay there till we are ready," continued Sir Topham Hatt. "And you really must be more careful with freight cars." Percy sighed. The freight cars groaned beneath his wheels. He quite understood about awkward predicaments. Sir Topham Hatt spoke severely to Daisy, too. "My engines work hard. I send lazy engines away." Daisy was ashamed. "However, Toby says you worked hard after Percy's accident, so you shall have another chance." "Thank you, sir," said Daisy. "I will work hard. Toby says he'll help me." "Excellent. What Toby doesn't know about branch line problems isn't worth knowing. Our Toby's an experienced engine." Next day, Thomas came back. And Percy was sent to be mended. Annie and Clarabelle were delighted to see Thomas again, and he took them for a run at once. All are now friends, and Toby has taught Daisy a great deal. She shoed a cow off the line the other day all by herself. That shows you, doesn't it?
Thomas the tank engine had been working in the coal yards all day. The little blue engine was covered in coal dust. "We can't clean you up tonight, Thomas," said his driver. "There's a problem with the hose pipe." Bother, said Thomas. A bath would make me feel much better. The others are sure to say I look silly. But the engines were too busy arguing to notice Thomas. James was talking loudest of all. I deserve a new coat of paint. Sir Topham Hatt says I'm the pride of the line, and... Rubbish, huffed Henry. We're all the pride of the line. It's been like this all day, confided Percy to Thomas. James is getting a new coat of paint and won't stop boasting about it. Why, James? I'm the one who needs a new coat. Look at me. I'd rather not, retorted James. You're not a pleasant sight, and wouldn't understand the needs of a really important engine. Thomas was fuming. Next morning, as James was being repainted, Henry had an accident. If you can't push cars properly, Henry, why not talk to a tree instead? You know how much you like the forest.
As a matter of fact, Bossy Boiler, Sir Topham Hatt is inspecting the island for trees that are too close to the line. He's worried they might cause trouble.
Pah! Laughed James. If I came upon a tree, I'd just push it aside.
Really?
Henry replied. Soon James was showing off his paintwork. Make way for an important engine. You wouldn't feel important if one of those trees crashed on you. You'd feel hurt, reproached Percy. Rubbish! It wouldn't dare! You should be careful, James. Trees can be just as powerful as engines, advised Terence. Oh, please. Now, excuse me, Sir Topham Hatt needs me to pull the express. And he huffed away. But James was wrong. You must go to the yards and collect an important goods train, James. It's heavy, so be careful, said Sir Topham Hatt. But, sir, I've just been repainted. Can't Thomas or Percy do it? They're dirty and like working with freight cars. Really useful engines don't argue. So James didn't. By the time he arrived at the yards, the weather had changed for the worse. Your color's nice, James. Pity about your face, though, said a freight car. James ignored them and set off. Soon they came to a hill, and his driver knew they were in for a difficult time. An old tree close to the track was being blown by the strong winds, and the rain had weakened the slope. All of a sudden, the tree moved. Oh, help! Cried James. Go away! But of course, the tree couldn't. James tried to reverse away from the tree, but his train was too heavy. Then he heard a whistle. It's Thomas, called his driver. James felt embarrassed and worried that Thomas would laugh at him, but Thomas didn't. He knew this was no time for teasing. Beep, beep. I'm ready, whistled Thomas. So am I, replied James. As ready as I'll ever be. They were just in time. Later, James spoke to Thomas. Percy and Terence were so right to warn me. Thank you for rescuing me, Thomas. Oh, that's all right. We engines must pull together, whatever the weather. Just then, Edward bustled in. Sir Topham Hatt thinks you're both brave engines. Thomas, you're going to have a new coat of paint. And James, Sir Topham Hatt says that tomorrow you'll pull the special express. Everyone was very happy.